What happens when a single spoonful of food holds the key to a forgotten past? For Julian Croft, a man who could buy the world, but couldn't retrieve a memory, dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant was just another Tuesday. But one dish, a dish not even on the menu, stopped him cold. It tasted like a life he thought he'd lost forever. He demanded to know who was responsible, expecting a world-renowned chef to step forward. Instead, the answer would come from the last person anyone expected, a quiet, overlooked waitress. Her story would not only change his life, but would unravel a secret connecting two different worlds in the most impossible way. Aurelia wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. Located on the 80th floor of the gleaming Atlas Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a divine view of the metropolis sprawling below. The light from 1,000 buildings shimmered like a carpet of fallen stars inside. The decor was a study in minimalist opulence, dark polished mahogany tables, cream-colored leather-upholstered chairs, and a single dramatic crystal chandelier dripping light like frozen tears. The clinking of silver on porcelain was a delicate symphony, punctuated by the important, hushed murmurs of the city's elite. For Sarah Washington, it was just another shift, another night of balancing impossibly heavy trays, smiling until her cheeks ached, and being looked upon as transparent as the glass walls around her. At 26, her life was a world away from the clients she served. Her reality was a cramped third-floor apartment, a pile of overdue medical bills for her younger brother Marcus, and the constant anxiety that came with it. Sarah moved with an efficiency that bordered on invisibility. She refilled water glasses before they emptied, cleared plates with a silent, whispered grace, and anticipated needs before they were expressed. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named David, called her reliable. The head chef, the insufferably arrogant Antoine Dubois, called her wallpaper. Both were right. Sarah had learned to blend in, to make herself small, because in a place like Aurelia, attracting attention was a risk. But beneath the starched black uniform, in the practice-neutral expression, there was a fire. It was a legacy passed down by her grandmother, Elodie, a woman who could make magic with little more than a cast-iron skillet and whatever grew in her Louisiana garden. Sarah's hands, though now hardened by carrying trays, knew the feel of kneading dough, the precise art of a chiffonade, the patient rhythm of stirring a roux sauce for hours until it reached the perfect shade of dark chocolate. Her grandmother's handwritten recipe book, its pages softened by time and stained by history, was her most prized possession. It was a Bible of flavors, a family story told in paprika, thyme, and bay leaves. That night, the tension in Aurelia was denser than usual. The reason was sitting at table 1, the most coveted spot with the most breathtaking view. Julian Croft wasn't just rich, he was an industry titan, a man whose name was whispered with a mix of awe and fear in boardrooms worldwide. His face, sharp and handsome, was marked by a permanent look of impatience, as if the world always moved too slowly for him. He was dining with 2 associates, their conversation a low, serious murmur about mergers and acquisitions worth more than the entire restaurant. Sarah was assigned to his section, and her heart pounded against her ribs. A good tip from that table could mean paying the rent without having to dip into the emergency fund she kept for Marcus's medications. A complaint could mean losing her job. "Good evening, Mr. Croft," her voice said, soft and steady, betraying none of the nerves churning inside her. "May I offer you something to drink to start?" Julian Croft didn't even look at her. He made a dismissive gesture with a hand wearing a watch more valuable than her car, saying, "Sparkling water, 3 glasses, and tell Chef Antoine that I'm not in the mood for his usual theatrics. I want something real, something with soul. See if he's capable of that." The insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that Sarah felt a flush of anger on her cheeks. Chef Antoine's theatrics were Michelin-starred dishes of deconstructed foams, gels, and earths that looked more like scientific experiments than food. They were technically brilliant, but emotionally sterile. Sarah knew exactly what the man meant by soul, but she also knew Antoine was incapable of providing it. She nodded politely, her mask of professional calm firmly in place. "Of course, sir." As she retreated to the kitchen, the order's weight felt heavier than any tray. She relayed the message to Chef Antoine, whose face contorted into a mask of pure indignation. "Soul," he sneered, his French accent thickening with his anger. "This billionaire peasant wouldn't know soul if it were served on a gold platter. He wants soul. Fine. Give him the coq au vin. It's simple enough for his unrefined palate." The kitchen staff hurried to obey, but as the night progressed, a small disaster occurred. A crucial imported ingredient for another VIP table's main course turned out to be spoiled. The kitchen descended into controlled panic. Chef Antoine yelled, his face purple. Amidst the chaos, Julian Croft's order was delayed. David, the manager, burst into the kitchen, his face pale. Table 1 is losing patience. Mr. Croft is asking about his main course. What's the status? It'll be ready when it's ready, snapped Antoine, distracted by the other crisis. It was in that moment of chaos when Sarah saw it, stored in the back of the pantry, something she'd brought for staff meals that week, a container of her own dark roux sauce, meticulously prepared, the heart and soul of her grandmother's signature dish, and in the refrigerator, she knew there were leftover andouille sausage and shrimp from last month's special. All the components were there. A reckless, insane idea sparked in her mind. Mr. Croft wanted something with soul. She had the soul of generations in her memory. She could prepare him a dish that sang with it. It was a risky gamble, a blatant violation of all rules, but the thought of Marcus, of the accumulating bills, and the stinging memory of Croft's casual disdain pushed her to the brink. While the rest of the kitchen was a whirlwind of panicked energy, Sarah slipped to a forgotten corner of the station. With trembling hands, she pulled out a pot. She was no longer a waitress. She was Elodie's granddaughter, and about to cook from the heart. The corner of the kitchen where Sarah worked became a sanctuary amid the storm. The clatter of pans, the sizzle of the grill, and Chef Antoine's furious shouts faded to a dull roar. Here was only the familiar, comforting ritual. Her movements were fluid and sure, a dance she had practiced 1,000 times in her own small kitchen, guided by her grandmother's ghostly presence. She began with the Trinity, the sacred trio of Creole cuisine, onion, celery, and bell pepper, finely diced. They hit the hot oil in the pot with a sizzle that was music to her ears. She sautéed them until soft and translucent, their aroma rising to form the fragrant base of the dish. She added crushed garlic, turned to a paste, letting it cook only a minute until its pungent aroma bloomed. Then came the heart of the gumbo, the dark, smoky roux sauce she had carefully prepared at home. It melted into the hot oil, thickening the base, turning it a rich, deep brown. She incorporated chicken broth slowly at first, ensuring no lumps, then with more confidence, until the mixture was a smooth, velvety canvas. This was where the magic happened. She reached for the spices, not measuring, but pouring them into her palm by instinct, by memory. A generous pinch of Cajun spices, a touch of cayenne for gentle, steady heat, dried thyme, and 3 essential bay leaves. Then came the secret ingredients, the 2 touches that made this Elodie's recipe and no one else's. A spoonful of filet powder made from ground sassafras leaves to thicken and add its unique earthy flavor. And the final, most important touch, a tiny pinch of freshly grated nutmeg. A secret her grandmother swore awakened everything. She let the base simmer, allowing flavors to meld and deepen into a complex harmony. Then she added the rich, spicy slices of andouille sausage, letting them release their flavor into the gumbo. The entire kitchen now began to fill with an aroma completely alien to Aurelia's usual sterile air, with its truffle oil and seared scallops. It was a warm, welcoming, deeply human smell. Some line cooks, drawn by the scent, paused their frantic work to watch. Their expressions were a mix of confusion and intrigue. "Washington, what do you think you're doing?" whispered one, a young cook named Leo with wide eyes. "If Antoine sees, cover me," Sarah whispered back, her eyes never leaving the pot. "Please." Leo hesitated for a second, then nodded firmly and returned to his station, creating a subtle screen with his body. The final step was seafood. She added the plump, pink shrimp at the last minute, letting them gently poach in the simmering gumbo until perfectly tender. Any longer, and they would become tough. It was a matter of timing and instinct. She poured the finished Jubilee gumbo into a simple rustic ceramic bowl, a marked contrast to Aurelia's pristine white porcelain. She crowned it with a perfect mound of fluffy white rice and a sprinkle of fresh chives and parsley. It wasn't just a bowl of food, it was a story. It was her ancestors' story of resilience and the joy of making something beautiful from humble ingredients. It was her grandmother's laughter and the warmth of her kitchen. It was everything this cold, gilded restaurant was not. Her heart pounded as she lifted the bowl. This was it. She bypassed the official expediting station, knowing Antoine would stop her. Catching the eye of a junior server, she said with an authority never before heard from her, "Table 1, now." The server, too intimidated to question her, nodded and carefully carried the bowl out of the kitchen. Sarah leaned against the cold stainless steel counter, her apron suddenly feeling heavy, her legs weak. She had just committed an act of culinary treason. She had sent a piece of her soul into the dining room to a man who had demanded it without knowing whom he was asking. Now all she could do was wait for the verdict. It would be her salvation or her ruin. Aurelia's dining room operated under a delicate set of unspoken rules. Sound was controlled, emotions were restrained, and decorum was paramount. The arrival of the gumbo at table 1 shattered that unspoken contract. First, it was the aroma. As the server placed the bowl in front of Julian Croft, a warm, complex scent, smoky, savory, with a hint of the sea, rose into the air. It was a stark contrast to the clean, almost clinical aromas of the other dishes. Heads at nearby tables turned, noses twitched with curiosity. Julian Croft stared at the bowl with a frown. This was not the pretentious, artistic plating he was accustomed to. It was simple, honest, almost rustic. It looked like something from a home kitchen, not a Michelin-starred establishment. His associates exchanged cautious glances. Had the chef insulted him with this peasant food? "What is this?" Julian asked, his voice low and cutting. The young, clueless server stammered. It's the chef's special, sir, for you." Julian picked up his spoon, a cynical sneer on his lips. He was ready to dismiss it, to call over the manager and reprimand the chef for this insolence. He dipped the spoon into the dark, rich broth, scooping up a piece of shrimp, a slice of sausage, and some rice. He brought it to his lips, his expression one of bored disdain. And then, everything changed. The moment the gumbo touched his tongue, his face relaxed. The cynical sneer vanished, replaced by a look of profound, absolute shock. His eyes, usually cold and piercing gray, widened and seemed to gaze at something far beyond the restaurant walls. His hand, still holding the spoon, trembled slightly. His 2 associates stopped their conversation, watching him with concern. "Julian, is everything all right?" one of them asked. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. He was no longer on the 80th floor of the Atlas Tower. He was a small child, no older than 7, sitting in a warm, sunlit kitchen that smelled of baking bread and something savory simmering on the stove. A woman with kind eyes and a soft, gentle laugh hummed a tune he hadn't heard in 30 years. She was serving something dark and wonderful from a big pot into his favorite blue bowl. It was the only clear memory he had of his mother before she left. The taste was identical, the smoky depth of the roux, the gentle heat of the cayenne, the earthy note of the filet, and something else. That almost imperceptible touch of nutmeg that awakened everything. It was a flavor profile he hadn't experienced in decades, a culinary ghost that had just materialized on his palate. He took another spoonful, and then another. It wasn't just food, it was an excavation. Every bite unearthed a fossil of a long-buried memory. His mother's smile, the feel of her hand on his head, the sound of her voice calling his name. Emotions he had locked away his entire adult life, grief, love. A deep, aching sense of loss surged within him, threatening to break through the formidable walls he had built around his heart. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his chiseled cheek. He angrily wiped it away, ashamed by the sudden, overwhelming display of emotion. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath. The silence at table 1 was a vacuum, drawing everyone's attention around it. Julian Croft, the ruthless predator of the financial world, sat perfectly still with his spoon suspended over a bowl of what looked like stew, with a look of stunned vulnerability on his face. He gently pushed the bowl away, his appetite gone, replaced by a desperate, urgent need. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room, finally landing on David, the manager, who was already hurrying toward the table, his face a mask of anxiety. "Sir, is the dish not to your liking?" David asked, his voice trembling. Julian Croft looked David directly in the eyes. The cold, authoritative fire was back in his gaze, but now it was fueled by something different. Not arrogance, but raw, desperate hope. His voice was quiet, but it resonated through the silent room with the force of thunder. Who made this? In the kitchen, Sarah heard the echo of the question from a rushing server. Her blood ran cold. The tone was not one of pleasure. It sounded like an accusation. She had been a fool, a reckless, stupid fool. She braced herself for the inevitable, for David to burst into the kitchen, for Chef Antoine to point a trembling, accusatory finger, for the words, "You're fired," to seal her fate. She clung to the worn edge of the counter, waiting for the axe to fall. The question hung in the air, electric and dangerous. Who made this? Inside the kitchen, Chef Antoine Du Bois heard it too. He saw the manager's panicked expression through the service window. He saw the stunned faces of the other diners and smelled an opportunity. The aroma of the gumbo, which had initially annoyed him, now smelled of success. A man like Julian Croft was in awe. It was the look of a deeply moved man. Pride and ambition, two of Antoine's most defining characteristics, surged within him. He straightened his immaculate white jacket, a predatory gleam in his eyes. This was his kitchen, his Michelin star. Any miracle that came out of it belonged to him. Before David could formulate a response, Chef Antoine strode confidently out of the kitchen, his posture radiating a false, theatrical humility. He moved through the dining room like a conquering hero, a confident smile plastered on his face. He reached table 1 and gave a slight, deferential bow. "Mr. Croft," he began, his accent a finely tuned instrument of culinary authority, "I am Chef Antoine Dubois. I am delighted that my little experiment pleased you." Sarah, watching through the small circular window in the kitchen door, felt her stomach plummet, her breath caught in her throat. His experiment. Julian Croft's gaze was intense, analytical. He looked at the impeccably dressed chef, scrutinizing his face. "You made this?" he asked, his voice still low and laden with meaning. "Of course," Antoine said with a flourish. "It is a dish I have been working on for some time, a modern interpretation of a rustic classic. I call it Louisiana Twilight." He was brilliant at improvising, weaving a narrative of culinary genius on the spot. The roux is aged for 48 hours in a humidity-controlled environment to deepen its complexity. The sausage is house-smoked with pecan wood. It is a very delicate technical process. He was painting a masterpiece of lies, using the jargon of haute cuisine to claim Sarah's heritage as his own. The line cooks who had seen Sarah at her station exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent. No one dared to contradict the chef. Julian listened to every word, his expression unreadable. "Louisiana Twilight," he repeated softly. The name sounded strange and wrong on his tongue. The explanation was technically impressive, filled with the buzzwords he expected from a chef of this caliber, but it felt empty. It didn't match the soul of what he had tasted. The dish didn't speak of humidity-controlled rooms or technical processes. It spoke of warmth, of hands, of history. "A classic old one," Julian pressed, narrowing his eyes slightly. "From where, exactly? What's its story?" Antoine's smile didn't waver. "It is my own homage to Creole tradition. The story is one of innovation, of taking the humble and elevating it to the sublime. That is my philosophy, you know?" In the kitchen, Sarah felt a rage so pure and hot it burned through her fear. He was stealing her grandmother's legacy. She was taking Elodie's Jubilee gumbo and packaging it as his own pretentious creation. He had called her wallpaper, someone invisible, and now he was stealing the only part of her that was truly vibrant. The injustice was a physical blow. She watched as Julian Croft nodded slowly, though a flicker of doubt remained in his eyes. He pulled out a sleek black business card from his jacket and slid it across the table to Antoine. "I'm opening a new flagship hotel in New York," Julian said, his voice returning to its usual businesslike tone. "It will have a signature restaurant. I'm looking for an executive chef, someone with vision, someone who can create food like this. Should we talk?" The offer hung in the air, worth millions. It was a career-defining opportunity. Antoine's eyes widened. His professional composure cracked momentarily to reveal the naked ambition beneath. He took the card with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. "It would be an honor, Mr. Croft," he said, his voice thick with triumph. Sarah watched the exchange, her heart shattering into a million pieces. He wasn't just stealing her dish, he was building a future with it. Her future, the future she dreamed of, the one that could finally give Marcus the life and care he deserved. All her hard work, her legacy, her act of reckless hope, it was all being handed to a fraud on a silver platter. The fear was gone. The quiet, invisible waitress was gone. All that remained was the fiery spirit of Elodie Washington's granddaughter. She pushed through the kitchen door and without a second thought began to walk toward table 1. The wallpaper was about to speak. Every step Sarah took across Aurelia's plush dining room carpet felt like a mile. The hushed conversations, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull hum. Her entire focus was a laser beam fixed on table 1, on Chef Antoine's triumphant, smug face and Julian Croft's powerful, scrutinizing eyes. David, the manager, saw her approaching, and his face went white with panic. He moved to intercept her, hands raised in an appeasing gesture. "Sarah, what are you doing? Get back to the kitchen now." Sarah walked past him as if he were a ghost. Her gaze never wavered from Julian Croft. She stopped at the edge of the table, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to keep them from trembling. She was just a waitress in a simple black uniform, but she held herself with the posture of a queen. The 3 men at the table stared at her. Julian's associates looked annoyed by the interruption. Chef Antoine's face darkened with fury. Julien, however, simply watched her, his expression one of intense, unwavering curiosity. He had seen the fire in her eyes as she approached. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the charged silence. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." Antoine stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and Julien. "This is a staff matter, Mr. Croft. My apologies. She is just a waitress." Clearly overwhelmed, he turned to Sarah, his voice a venomous whisper. "Get back to the kitchen before I have you fired." "A waitress who knows you're lying," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly in volume and conviction. She looked past Antoine directly at Julien. "He didn't make that dish, sir. I did." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. This was better than theater. Antoine let out a short, ugly laugh. "This is absurd. She's delusional. The stress of the night has clearly gotten to her." Julien Croft watched silently, his gaze alternating between the furious, indignant chef and the calm, resolute waitress. He was a man who had built an empire by reading people, detecting bluffs, sensing weaknesses and deception. He looked at Antoine's theatrical outrage and then at Sarah's quiet, unwavering certainty. "Is that so?" Julien said, his voice dangerously soft. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. He wasn't speaking to Antoine, he was speaking only to Sarah. "If you made it, then tell me about it. Tell me about your Louisiana Twilight." He used the chef's pretentious name with a slight, ironic twist. Sarah took a deep breath. "It's not called Louisiana Twilight, it's called Jubilee Gumbo. And it doesn't have a philosophy, it has a history." Antoine tried to interrupt. "This is preposterous." "Let her speak," Julien commanded, his voice sharp as steel. Antoine fell silent, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and fear. "The roux isn't aged in a special room," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "It's made in a cast-iron skillet, stirred with a wooden spoon for almost an hour until it's the color of milk chocolate and smells of toasted nuts. You don't smoke the sausage with pecan wood. You use a specific brand from a small supplier in St. Martin Parish because it has just the right balance of smoke and spice. And the true depth of flavor doesn't come from any modern technique. It comes from the Trinity, a little filet powder, and 3 whole bay leaves that you have to remember to take out before serving." She was reciting the steps not like a recipe, but like a sacred text. Every detail was a brushstroke, painting a picture of authenticity that Antoine's lies couldn't match. Julien's face was a mask of concentration. He hung on every word. Sarah looked him directly in the eyes, her voice lowering to a more personal, intimate level. "And there's one last thing, a secret, something only the person who made it would know, a tiny pinch of a spice that doesn't belong in traditional gumbo, but my grandmother swore by it. She said it was the key. She said it woke everything up." Julien Croft's carefully constructed composure finally broke. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table, color draining from his face. The air crackled with tension. He knew what she was going to say. "What spice?" his voice whispered, barely audible. Antoine looked back and forth between them, growing horror on his face. This was no longer about a job offer. This was a courtroom, and he was on trial. He had no idea what she was talking about. He had no answer. Sarah held Julien's gaze. "Nutmeg," she said softly. "A pinch of freshly grated nutmeg." The word hit Julien Croft like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling. It was true. He remembered his mother at her spice rack, grating a tiny little nut, telling him with a conspiratorial wink, "This is our little secret, Julien. It wakes everything up." It was a detail so small, so specific, so deeply buried in his memory that hearing its name spoken aloud felt like a supernatural event. He knew with absolute certainty that the man in front of him was a liar and that the waitress, was the guardian of a truth he thought he had lost forever. He turned his icy gaze to the now sweating Chef Antoine. The game was over. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the 80th floor dining room. Chef Antoine Dubois stood frozen, his face a ghastly pale, the intricate web of lies he had woven so easily just incinerated by a single word: nutmeg. Julien Croft slowly lifted his gaze from the table and fixed it on Antoine. There was no anger in his eyes, no theatrical rage. There was something far more terrifying, a cold, silent finality. It was the look he gave a rival company just before a hostile takeover. It was the look of absolute demolition. "Get out," Julian said. The words were not loud, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. "Mr. Croft, I can explain," Antoine stammered, his bravado crumbling to dust. "There was a miscommunication in the kitchen." "I don't recall asking for an explanation," Julian said, his voice dropping further. "I recall telling you to get out. Leave this restaurant. I'll speak to the owners in the morning. I suggest you find a new profession. I hear accounting is stable." He then turned his head slightly. David, the manager, who had been hovering nearby, looking as though he was about to faint, scurried closer. "Yes, Mr. Croft. This man's employment is terminated effective immediately. Get him out of here." David nodded vigorously, taking Antoine's arm. The chef, disgraced, stripped of his pride and his future, allowed himself to be led away without another word. His white jacket suddenly seemed like a shroud. The dining room began to hum with frantic, hushed whispers. Julian's associates watched in stunned silence at the raw, personal drama unfolding before them. Julian paid them no mind. He had forgotten they were even there. His entire world had shrunk to the space occupied by the waitress in front of him. He turned his full attention to Sarah. His expression was no longer cold or intimidating. It was raw, vulnerable, and filled with a desperate, aching question. "How?" His voice rasped with emotion. "How could you know that?" Sarah's own anger had receded, replaced by a profound sense of vindication. "I told you," she said softly. "It wasn't my secret. It was my grandmother's." "Your grandmother?" Julian repeated, the words feeling strange and momentous. "She taught you how to cook?" "She taught me everything," Sarah said, a sad smile touching her lips. "She raised me in her kitchen in the trimmy neighborhood of New Orleans. Every dish she made had a story. Jubilee gumbo was her masterpiece. It was the first thing she taught me, and the last thing I cooked with her before she passed away." The mention of New Orleans sent another jolt through Julian. It was all connecting, puzzle pieces from two different worlds coming together to form a picture he was terrified to look at. "Her name," Julian said, his voice strained. "Tell me your grandmother's name." It felt strange to say it aloud in this sterile, opulent room. Her name was something sacred, belonging to the world of screened-in porches, the scent of magnolias, and the low hum of cicadas. "Her name was Elodie," Sarah said, her voice filled with love and reverence. "Elodie Washington." The name hit Julian Croft with the force of a physical impact. He visibly flinched, as if struck. Elodie Washington was not just a name. It was a key unlocking the last rusted door in the farthest corner of his memory. He remembered his mother speaking of her time in New Orleans. A brief bohemian summer she spent there before meeting his father and being swept into a world of wealth and expectations. She always spoke of that time with unique fondness, a nostalgia for a life she didn't get to live, and she always spoke of one person. "My mother," Julian began, his voice breaking. He had to stop to compose himself, a battle raging within him. "Before she married my father, she spent a summer volunteering at a community center in New Orleans. She wasn't good at cooking. She always burned everything." A faint, sad smile crossed his lips. "But she always told me about a woman she met there, a kind, brilliant cook who ran the center's kitchen, a woman who took pity on her and taught her to make one perfect dish, a dish my mother made for me every year on my birthday until she left." Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest, a wild, impossible idea beginning to form in her mind. She could barely breathe. Julian looked up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The truth was laid bare for both of them to see. "Her best friend that summer," he said, his voice laden with 30 years of buried grief. The woman who taught her that recipe, her name was Elodie Washington. The revelation settled over the table, so profound and so impossibly intimate that it created its own pocket of silence in the bustling restaurant. The world outside the table's bubble ceased to exist. There were only a billionaire haunted by his past and a waitress who was the living embodiment of that past. Sarah felt her knees weaken. She reached out and braced herself on the back of an empty chair. Her grandmother had mentioned a long-ago friend, a sweet but clumsy young woman from the north named Eleanor, who had a laugh like wind chimes and a fierce desire to learn to cook at least one thing to impress her family. Elodie had taught her the Jubilee gumbo, a dish she shared with only a select few. "Could it be your mother?" Sarah whispered, the name catching in her throat. Her name was Eleanor. Julian nodded, a look of pure astonishment on his face. Eleanor Croft. Before she married, she was Eleanor Bance. It was true. The fragmented, half-forgotten stories of two different families from two different worlds had just converged in a way that defied all logic. Sarah's grandmother, the humble but brilliant cook from New Orleans, and Julian Croft's mother, the future high society wife, had shared a friendship, a kitchen, and a secret recipe. That recipe had become a lifeline of memory for a grieving son and a legacy of love for a devoted granddaughter. The dish was not just a meal. It was a bridge spanning decades of loss and circumstance, connecting them at that precise moment. My grandmother spoke of her, Sarah said, her own eyes now misty. She said Eleanor was the only person she knew who could burn water, but that she had the kindest heart she'd ever known. She sent my grandmother a postcard every year for her birthday, even after she became Mrs. Croft. Sarah remembered those postcards. They were always from elegant, faraway places, Paris, Rome, Tokyo. To a little girl in New Orleans, they seemed like messages from another planet, and they were always signed, "Fondly, your friend Eleanor." Julian ran a hand over his face, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "My mother passed away when I was 10, he said, his voice low and heavy. After that, my father wasn't a sentimental man. He put all her things away, her letters, her photos. He wanted to move on. I think he thought he was protecting me, but he was erasing her. That taste, that was the only thing I had left of her, the only thing he couldn't take away. I've spent years trying to find it. I've hired the best chefs in the world to try and replicate it from my descriptions. No one even came close." He looked at Sarah, and for the first time, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw that 7-year-old boy in the sunlit kitchen, a child who had lost his mother and the taste of his childhood all at once. "They couldn't replicate it," Sarah said softly, "because they were missing the most important ingredient." "The nutmeg?" Julian asked. Sarah shook her head. "The story. They were just following instructions. You have to cook it with love. That's what my grandmother always said. It's the only way to make it Jubilee." The raw emotion of the moment was overwhelming. Julian's two associates, realizing they were intruding on something sacred, quietly excused themselves, leaving Sarah and Julian alone at the table. Julian gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please," he said, "sit." It was the first time an employer had ever asked her to sit during service. She sank into the soft leather chair, her apron feeling utterly out of place in the opulent setting. "All this time," Julian mused, gazing out at the city lights but seeing something entirely different. "All my life, I've been chasing success, building an empire, thinking that was what mattered. I thought that dish was just about a taste, a memory, but it's more than that. It's a connection. It's a legacy." He turned his intense gaze to her. The ruthless CEO was gone, replaced by a man humbled by a truth he never expected to find. "Your grandmother gave my mother a gift that she passed on to me, and you just gave it back. You have no idea what you've done for me tonight." Sarah could only nod, tears now tracing freely down her cheeks. "She was the most incredible person I've ever known. I've only been trying to do right by her, to keep her memory alive." "You've done more than that," Julian said, a new energy entering his voice. The fog of grief was beginning to clear, replaced by the clarity and determination that had made him a titan. An idea was forming, an opportunity born not of profit and loss, but of destiny and legacy. "This is not how your story, or your grandmother's, should be told," he said, leaning forward, his eyes alight with purpose. "Hidden in the kitchen of a place like this. That's not right. A gift like yours, a legacy like Elodie Washington's, deserves a cathedral." The morning after the life-changing night at Aurelia felt surreal. Sarah woke in her small apartment to the familiar sounds of city traffic, but the oppressive weight of anxiety that usually greeted her was gone, replaced by a strange, vibrant lightness. She expected a call from David, the manager, to fire her. Instead, the call came from a soft-spoken woman who introduced herself as Julian Croft's executive assistant. She informed Sarah that Mr. Croft had arranged for a private car to pick her up in an hour. She had, the assistant explained, a business proposition to discuss. Before she could process this, another call came. It was David. His voice was imbued with a panicked respect she'd never heard from him before. "Sarah, please don't hang up. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry about last night. What Chef Antoine did was unforgivable. Mr. Croft's lawyers have been in touch. Your employment has been terminated." He paused, then added, "But Mr. Croft insisted on a severance package. It's equivalent to a full year's salary. He paused, then added, and Leo, the line cook, he told them how you prepared the dish and how he covered for you. Mr. Croft made sure he's looked after too. Sarah was speechless. A year's salary. It was a safety net so vast she could barely comprehend it. It meant Marcus's bills were covered. It meant they could breathe. Thank you, David managed to say, her voice thick with emotion, loyalty rewarded. It was a beautiful concept. An hour later, Sarah found herself stepping out of a sleek black car and into the lobby of Croft Enterprises, a glass and steel skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. She was escorted to the penthouse floor, where Julian Croft's office occupied the entire corner. It was a minimalist space dominated by a huge oak desk and a panoramic city view that made Aurelia's look like a postcard. Julian wasn't behind his desk. He stood by the window, looking out, dressed not in a suit, but a simple gray cashmere sweater. He turned as she entered, and his smile was genuine, devoid of the arrogance she'd seen at first. Sarah Pina, he said, using her full name with a soft respect. Thank you for coming. He gestured to two comfortable chairs near the window. I haven't been able to stop thinking about last night, about your grandmother and mine. It feels like fate. I don't know what to call it, Sarah admitted, sitting down, feeling small in the vast, powerful room. It's a lot to take in. I want to make you an offer, he said, getting straight to the point, his business instincts still sharp. And I want to be very clear. This isn't charity. It isn't a gift. I consider what you have a rare and immensely valuable asset. Your talent, your grandmother's legacy, it's priceless. I want to be your partner. I want to build a restaurant with you, for you, a place that honors Elodie Washington. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. A partner, a full partner? She confirmed. I will provide the capital, the real estate, the business infrastructure. You will provide the soul. You will have complete creative control. The menu, the design, the staff, the name, everything. We will build a temple to the kind of food that changed our lives. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Tell me, Sarah Pina, what do you see when you close your eyes and imagine the perfect place to tell your grandmother's story? What does it look like? And so, in that sterile, billion-dollar office, she described to him a place with warm brick walls, the sound of jazz, the smell of toasted spices, and a kitchen that was open and full of life, not hidden in the back, a place where every guest felt like they were coming home. He listened to every word, and when she finished, he simply said, "We're going to build it." The first thing Sarah did, with the generous advance Julian wired to her account, was secure a consultation at the city's most prestigious neurological clinic for Marcus. She sat with her brother in the plush waiting room, holding his hand. When they were called in to meet with the renowned doctor, Sarah explained Marcus's entire medical history with newfound confidence. The doctor listened patiently, then outlined an innovative treatment plan. For the first time, there was a clear, tangible path, not just to stability, but to recovery. Leaving the clinic, Marcus stopped on the sidewalk and hugged his sister tightly, tears of relief streaming down his face. The shadow they had lived under for so long was finally receding. The next few months were a whirlwind of joyous, creative chaos. Julian secured the perfect building in the historic district, and they began the transformation. Sarah went through her grandmother's recipe book, not just selecting dishes, but curating a narrative. Each item on Elodie's menu came with a short story, a memory of its origin. She insisted on hiring her own staff. Her first hire was Leo, the young line cook from Aurelia, whom she made her sous chef. She interviewed dozens of others, asking them not about their technique, but about the first food they ever loved. She assembled a team that understood cooking was an act of love. Meanwhile, Julian was undergoing his own transformation. One afternoon, Sarah found him in the half-finished restaurant, awkwardly holding one of her grandmother's heavy cast-iron skillets. "She cooked in this?" he asked in wonder. "Every day," Sarah smiled. "Want a lesson?" She spent the next hour teaching him the patient, meditative process of making a perfect roux. He was clumsy, splattering flour on his expensive pants, but he was also utterly absorbed, a look of peaceful concentration on his face she had never seen before. In that moment, sharing a laugh over a cloud of flour, they weren't a billionaire and a chef, they were just two people honoring a shared past. Opening night at Elodie's was everything they had dreamed of, and more. The room was alive, a vibrant tapestry of people from all walks of life. A jazz trio played softly in a corner. Marcus, looking healthier and happier than he had in years, was proudly at the host's stand, his smile a beacon of warmth. Sarah, in a crisp white chef's jacket with Elodie's embroidered over her heart, moved through the room. She wasn't hidden in the kitchen. She was sharing her story. She paused at a table where a notorious food critic, a man known for his harsh reviews, was taking a bite of the Jubilee gumbo. She saw his eyes close for a moment, his professional facade melting into one of pure, genuine pleasure. He looked at her and simply nodded, a universe of approval in the gesture. Late in the evening, she found Julian standing by the bar, watching the scene with a quiet, contented smile. He held a small bowl of her gumbo. She would have loved this. His voice was hoarse. My mother always wanted a place that felt like this, full of life. She would have been so proud of you, Sarah said, looking at the joyful room, at her healthy brother, at the incredible new life that had bloomed from a single act of defiance. I think they both are. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a testament to the fact that our true legacy isn't the money we make, but the love we share and the memories we nurture. The wallpaper had not only found her voice, she had built a beautiful, thriving home for it, a jubilee for all to share. Serapina's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by our job title or our circumstances. The world may have seen her as just a waitress, but she carried within her a legacy of love, talent, and history that was richer than any fortune. It took a man not just seeking a meal, but seeking a memory, to finally see her. Her story shows us that food is never just food. It's memory, it's connection, and sometimes it's destiny on a plate. It teaches us not to underestimate the quiet ones, for they often have the most powerful stories to tell. What did you think of Sarah's incredible journey? Do you believe a single moment can change a life forever? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to Stories of Black Women for more unforgettable stories.